Happy Wednesday, eighth graders. We're going to continue with our last day of notes for the road to the Civil War. Yesterday, we talked about the Republican Party and Dred Scott decision. So today, we are going to cover John Brown's raid. In 1859, John Brown and supporters raided a federal arsenal. A federal arsenal is a place where they keep weapons or a gun warehouse. And this happened in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. He hoped that slaves would flock to the captured arsenal. The U.S. troops that led were led by Robert E. Lee, ended the uprising, and John Brown was captured. Robert E. Lee was one of the historical leaders that we talked about earlier last week with an assignment, where I had you look at a couple of the major historical leaders or people of historical significance that when it came to the Civil War. When John Brown was executed or killed, church bells rang throughout New England to mourn his death. Remember, New England was located in the Northern Territory if you were dividing the North and the South territories. To the Southerners, the Northerners' response was outrageous. To criticize slavery was one thing, but to sing the praises of a man who hoped to lead a slave revolt was intolerable. So it was something to criticize and be against the slavery movement, to be anti-slavery, to be a part of the Republican Party at this point in time in the 1850s. But it was one thing to be so passionate and so supportive of somebody that was trying to lead a full-on slave revolt. So this is the line that the Southerners just couldn't believe the Northerners had crossed. So it was one thing to just say I am anti-slavery, and another thing to take action and lead a slave revolt in John Brown's raid. So John Brown was quoted, I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away, but with blood. So that was saying that it seemed to be that this was the point where there was going to be no political process, any treaty, any peace offerings, any way of verbally coming to an agreement that the tensions between anti and pro slavery territories was going to be dealt with blood, with fighting, with violence, and with war. Real quick, we are going to cover Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was obviously a huge player when it comes to the Civil War and ending slavery in America. So, this is something that we're obviously going to go into more with our next notes, but we're just going to talk a little bit about Lincoln as a politician and his values and movements real quick here. The Lincoln Douglas debates. Lincoln was a candidate to potentially become president. The other candidate was named Stephen Douglas, who was from Illinois, and he was also from the Democratic Party. So Abraham Lincoln was from the Republican Party. Stephen Douglas was the Democratic Party, and the debates were a series of 7 debates in which Lincoln, shared his values, his opinions, his political stands, and that was all resonating with anti-slavery, whereas Stephen Douglas was pro-slavery. The Illinois Senate race was where these debates were held. This also led to the Freeport Doctrine and showed that there was a House divided. So there was a huge debate going on again between pro slavery and anti slavery. And Lincoln's rise to power was on the foundation that he would be elected and would support the movement to stop the spread of slavery in the United States territories. So the election of 1860, the candidates were Republican Abraham Lincoln, the Northern Democrat was Stephen Douglas, and then remember how we've talked about sectionalism and how the United States at this point was divided. So there wasn't just a Northern Democrat, but there was also a Southern Democrat named John Breckinridge, and then somebody that represented the Constitutional Union Party was John Bell. So if you look at this map, the electoral votes in the places that were in this political race included this specific side of the United States right here, along with Oregon and California. But right now we're going to focus on this area. So the Constitutional Union was in the center, kind of on the Missouri Compromise line, like we talked about a few weeks ago. The North was highly in support of Lincoln as well as Illinois, which I think is significant to mention because that was where Stephen Douglas was from. And then the Southern Democratic was primarily for Breckinridge, whereas the Northern Democratic in Missouri was very much in support of Stephen Douglas, who was the participant in the Lincoln Douglas debates. With the Democratic Party split, Republican victory was certain. So, being able to show the strength of one Republican Party versus the two Northern and Southern Democratic was significant. Lincoln carried the North and won without the South, which is incredibly impactful because you can see the size of the South and how those electoral votes and the popular vote contributed to the winnings of Lincoln as the 1860 president. To many Southerners, Lincoln's election meant the South no longer had a voice in the national government. So, by accepting Abraham Lincoln as their president, they realized that they would have to secede the movement of slavery. So, that is what we're going to talk about and what this is going into the Civil War, because instead of giving up their values and giving up their opinions and their essentially their slaves, which they considered as quote unquote property, they decided to split apart. So the Union is broken, the Union being the United States as a unified territory. Southerners felt that the North had put an abolitionist in the White House. And remember, abolitionists were people that were fighting against slavery. Secession, they believed, was their only choice. So on December 20th, 1860, South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union. So when this decision was made, that meant that they were leaving everything that the United States as a union had to offer. So they stepped away and claimed their territory as independent. On February 1st, 1861, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas also seceded. So you can look at the territories right here that are splitting away from the United States. They created the Confederate States of America. So this land up here was still considered a part of the Union, a part of the United States, but this territory down here was now, at this point in 1861, considered the Confederate States of America. So, the progress of secession, we talk about the Union states, which I just mentioned right here in the red, the border slave states that did not secede. So, these were still considered slave states within and which was recognized by the Union, but were still a part of the United States or the Union. States that seceded after the fall of Fort Sumter, which we're going to look at these battles here shortly this week, and then states that seceded before the fall of Fort Sumter. So, all of these states from Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, all the way down to Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina at this point were now considered Confederate States of America. So the war comes. This is when the official start of the Civil War is officially declared. The Confederacy had started to seize federal forts in the South. It felt the forts were a threat because the United States was now a foreign power. So they considered anything that was outside of their territory to be foreign. So, based on the Confederate States of America, all this territory was quote unquote foreign, the way that we view territories such as Canada or other territories, for example, in Europe, we consider those foreign land. At this point, since they had seceded, this was quote unquote foreign. If Lincoln sent troops to hold the forts, he might start a war. So, by sending troops into an area that is considered foreign, that is considered a what would be a national war, but a war within a foreign country or a foreign territory. So, this was considered one area and this was considered another. They were no longer in the same category. So, sending soldiers from the north to the south would start what the legal term um, declares as war or defines as war. Fort Sumter was an important fort because it guarded Charleston Harbor, which was an incredibly profitable port. Robert Anderson, the Union commander, refused to surrender this fort, which was a part of the Union or the North. Confederate guns blasted Fort Sumter. Anderson was out of ammo. Anderson surrendered and nobody was injured. So the Confederates um, decided to try and take this fort, which was the first step in defense or offense in the Civil War. And this led to the Union, Anderson, surrendering this fort to the South or the Confederate States. And that is what we refer to in this map as the states that ceded after and ceded before Fort Sumter. So with that being said, this is the end of our notes today. I'm going to post an answer key that looks like this on our Google Classroom once it loads, to kind of make sure you guys are all caught up. And then we are going to move forward with battles tomorrow on the assignment. All right, guys, hope to hear from you soon.